In this video, I want to share with you how you can make your sequences in Ableton Live sound more generative and therefore more musically interesting and active. Because there's always a chance when you're using a DAW that you create a sequence that actually sounds cool, but if you don't add some variations or modulations that make it sound interesting over time, you get tired really easily. And here's some example of it. So for example, here's a sequence without any modulation. And here's how it's going to sound like after applying the techniques I'm going to show you in this video. My name is Janis, by the way, in case you're new to this channel, and I'm really glad you're here. It's a lot about Ableton Live, generative music, but also drumming, making sounds, synthesizers, beats, whatever, because I'm a drummer also myself. So be already warmly invited to check out some other videos. And for now, let's get right into it, because we have to start with a MIDI track. So you can just create a MIDI track and select any sounds. And I kind of encourage you to select a sound that is already organized in a rack that looks like this, because it's easier to apply modulations to those knobs than it is to the individual synthesizer that looks like this, which you can also do if you're comfortable with it. But if you're kind of new to Ableton or to making sequences, I encourage you to choose one of those sounds. This is actually one of my own ones because I also sell my own sounds. This is from my Ableton Synth collection. In case you're interested, I'm going to link it down below in the description. And also what we need is a sequence, and this can really be any sequence. So here is my sequence, also from a collection, actually some pack I sell. It's called Human Arpeggiator. I played all of them with my drumming technique, which adds some interesting touch to them. I'm also going to put a link down below in the description. But if you need to make a sequence, you can also keep it really simple and, I don't know, just create some notes in maybe C. Every now and then go to D. And maybe also add some E or E flat. Really doesn't have to be complicated. The first thing I want to share with you is called chance, and it's a little hidden. You have to open the MIDI clip where you see your composition or your clip. And in Ableton 11, it's this icon here that opens the chance. In Ableton 12, which I'm not using yet, it's also somewhere here. I think it looks slightly different, but you will also find it here. And this now means that per note, you can change the chance. So if you put it to 0%, it actually won't get played. So it's like muting the note. But if it's at 50%, it will play with the 50% chance. So every other note, but not always the other note, but overall, it's like 5 out of 10 notes will be played. And you can use this to your advantage, especially if you determine some notes inside a sequence that you find really important. And often those are like the highest notes. So for me, this sounds like the main motive that where I can basically mute those notes and the sequence still sounds cool to me. Sounds cool. And now we can bring those notes back, but change the chance. So maybe we only want to have it at 50%. And now there will be gaps, but also there will be the notes, and it will just create some interesting movement that makes the sequence sound a little more musical, because it's a bit like you're improvising, you're sometimes leaving out notes, sometimes you're playing them. It's just more exciting to listen to, just listen to it. And you can do it individually per note, but I'm also a big fan of doing it individually per pitch. So you could also determine maybe another chance for the F sharp, maybe 80% or 75%, and really create your own kind of setup. So that's how you can add some tonal variety to your sequence, and also gaps or breaks are just so important. If you always have notes on every step, it can sound really tiring, but having some breathing room or at least one note that gets left out usually has some super amazing impact on the overall sound. But speaking about sound, still we have exactly the same sound all the time. There's no change to the tonal color of the sound. So let's change that. And you can go to the view of the synth, and then under MIDI effects, there's some effect called expression control. And it's really one of my favorite MIDI effects because it basically creates some random LFOs for you that you can use for modulating everything. And you can also choose other things than random, but I mostly use random here, so you can choose random and map it to basically any parameter of the synth. So for example, if you map it to time, it's like some release type knob, so the sound will get a little longer or shorter. And if I press play now, you will see that we get quite some variation. A little too much for my taste, but we can refine it. So amount is basically the intensity of how much the knob jumps around. So you get really big jumps this way, which is too much for me. And here you can also refine in what kind of area the knob is going to operate. And smaller amounts of amount usually sound a bit more musical because you don't get those extreme jumps. So this could be some very pleasing variation. And you can add more of them. You can basically experiment what they do to the sound. So choose another random, map it maybe to the brightness. So now we will probably change the tone color. Oh yeah. This is too much. Then you refine it again. Let's maybe try adding another one to the timbre so we get even more variation in the terms of the tonal color. Probably bring the max already down a little because we're more in the lower range, and otherwise it will sound really extreme. Those randomizations are so fun to explore, and I even prefer them to LFOs for this type of effect, because with the Ableton instruments and LFOs, I don't think you can map or you can sync the random LFO to the sound in a way that it only gets triggered once or it sends out one value per step. You usually get some movement afterwards, so it would sound more glitchy. And here you just have one value per step, so it's perfect for doing this type of modulation. But speaking about the LFO, you can also do quite some fun stuff with it. So let's check it out. Let's go to audio effects and modulators and load the LFO. Again, like with the expression control, you can map it to anything. And here, something that is fun is to use a delay. So you can see on return A, I have some delay effect. To use this LFO to just sometimes add the delay. And this is a delay that has quite some feedback. So if I would constantly send the sound into the delay, it would sound a bit annoying because there's so much feedback and like you're kind of overwhelmed by all the sound. But if you use some LFO in a very particular mode, which is called bin, like binary, I think, it just randomly changes between on and off. So if we map this to a delay, we'll just sometimes have the delay and sometimes we won't have it, but also we don't want to have 100%. Maybe let's try 76. And see what happens. So we kind of want to have a slower tempo. Although it could sound interesting with fast tempos as well. And since we have a reverb, we can do the same with the reverb, and we could use the same LFO, because you can actually map multiple destinations to one LFO, but I prefer to just duplicate it, Command D, because then we get some other random value. And otherwise, we always get the reverb when we get the delay. And here we have some independent LFO that will actually trigger the reverb not always at the same time, so we get more variety. So I would always create different LFOs actually, even if they do the same thing for modulating different things, so they are not in sync, so there's more variation. Otherwise it can sound a little confusing if out of a sudden all effects get increased, for example. So instead of mapping it to the delay, we map it to the reverb. And let's check this out. We can also change the rate a bit. And another fun thing to try with LFOs is modulating certain parameters of some effect, for example, the feedback time of the delay. So let's actually bring in some LFO here. It has this cool random mode, and you can also make it smoother. So in case of having those big jumps, you can actually create those types of movements. So it's like modulating a knob, not having those kind of extreme jumps. Picking a tempo and mapping this to the feedback, and let's see what happens. And there are absolutely no limitations. You can use like 200 LFOs and apply them to basically anything, which is also a little bit of the problem here because there's no limitation. That's why synthesizers or hardware synthesizers are sometimes great if you're restricted to maybe just 2 LFOs, because like this, it can really get out of hand. But if you just try to use as many as you need and you experiment a little and then you stick to 2 or 3 LFOs, I think you can get some super amazing results. And I mean, this sounds pretty cool now, I think. Let's also check out some more stuff you can do in terms of tone variety, because there are some other amazing MIDI effects, for example, random. And we can drag it in. It needs to be in front of the sound. And now we basically... actually, there are 2 approaches of using random. One is to occasionally add some octave, and for using octaves, you need to set scale to 12 and choices to 1. And now, once I actually increase it, we will see that sometimes we get the tone an octave higher. And this is some simple effect, but I find it incredibly pleasing. And if you use by, you actually go up and down, so sometimes you get the tone some octave lower. And another great way of using the random effect is to use it together with a scale effect. And here you need to know in what kind of scale you are. I mean, here you see I called my own sequences actually by name of the scale. So this is Lydian. Otherwise, you can go into the MIDI sequencer and enable scale, and then it's going to highlight some notes. So you see once I choose Lydian, it's going to highlight all notes. So you can do it with, usually it should be one of those first scales. You don't need to try Dorian sharp 4 or something. That's very unlikely. So usually one of those first scales should fit. And then you can look for that scale inside the scale menu. In this case, it would be, what was it, Lydian? And simply drag it behind the random effect. Actually, there's no random effect yet for what we try to do here, because we need a second one. The octave effect can stay, and now we need a second random effect that basically can randomize the whole sequence. So the scale plugin makes sure that the randomizations will be in sync with the sequence, because otherwise it's going to be chromatic and it sounds messy quite quickly. And now if I increase the chance, you will see that the sequence will actually start to sound less like the sequence because the tones get varied, but it can be super cool. 100% we completely randomize our melodies. And now comes the real power of the Ableton Live synthesizer, because you can still create automations for all parameters that you can see here, even for the MIDI clip. So if you open it, you see little sections here. So the first one is always for the notes. Again, I think at Ableton 12 it might look slightly different, but it's going to be somewhere here. And I think it's called envelopes, probably like here. You can see that for the random effect, we can actually create envelopes or kind of curves for all parameters. Like right now it's on chance, we can also create it for device on. Or actually let's do it for chance. So if we draw a note, not a note, like a little curve, we can say in the beginning we only want to have like a little bit of variation, but then towards the end of the sequence we want to increase it. So in the end there's some build up. Would look like this. So let's actually see how this sounds like. Actually, that's pretty cool. I mean, more obvious would be to put it to 100% here. Even that's actually a cool variation. Now, while this is more like some compositional approach, there are also techniques for creating instruments that are more tailored towards live performance or changing things with a MIDI controller. And actually, I'm going to link you a video here, which is about creating some performance sequencer for Ableton Live. And also here is the video about the sequencing technique based on my drumming style, which is also something I warmly invite you to check out. Apart from that, I wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.